This is Democracy Watch. Okay, I'm so excited to be doing this video in particular. So I'm joined, as always, by Marc Elias, one of the country's top voting rights attorneys. In this series, we've spoken about a number of redistricting cases in a number of states, a lot of which Marc and his team are litigating right now. So we're going to do a comprehensive breakdown of which states' gerrymandered maps are being challenged and how many seats may be up for grabs for Democrats as the result of that litigation. And I hope that this breakdown will show just how enormous of an impact those redistricting cases will have as we head into 2024. So first, Marc, we'll start with an easy one. I feel like the one we've been speaking about the most, and that's Alabama. So what is the status of redistricting in Alabama, and how many seats are up for grabs for Democrats?
So you started with a good one because we won. So Alabama is the case that people will remember went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's called Allen v. Milligan. The challenge was whether the Voting Rights Act required the state of Alabama to create two rather than one majority or Black opportunity districts. The trial court with two Trump appointees said that they did have to create two rather than one. Alabama appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed that they had to create two rather than one. Alabama then defied all of the court's orders for a while. And in the end, the state of Alabama had a map imposed on them by a special master, which is just an expert hired by the court. And that map has been now adopted by the court. And so there will now be an additional Black opportunity district for 2024. And I think we can safely call that Democrats +1.
Okay, let's move on to Louisiana.
All right, Louisiana traveled a very similar path to Alabama because at the same time that, and I should say, my team sued Alabama, it also sued Louisiana, and Louisiana's answer was the same as Alabama's, which was we didn't need to do this, and if we did, the statute's unconstitutional. When they lost, like Alabama lost, they also went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they told the U.S. Supreme Court, we're just like Alabama. Then after we won in Alabama, now they're like, we're not at all like Alabama. Yeah. But in fact, they are just like Alabama. So we are awaiting the tail end of that process we're in. If we prevail, which I think we will, that would mean that Louisiana would also have two rather than one Black opportunity district. And if so, that again would clearly be +1 for Democrats.
Okay, moving over to Georgia.
All right, I could put this on rewind and just take out Alabama and Louisiana and Georgia. My team also sued Georgia, also under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, also claiming that the state of Georgia failed to create an additional Black opportunity district in the Atlanta area. And that case went to trial in Georgia. We expect a ruling by November. And while it is always hard to predict how courts will rule, I think it is extremely likely that the trial judge there will also say that Georgia violated the Voting Rights Act and needs to add an additional Black opportunity district for 2024. Already, Brad Raffensperger and the other Republicans are already claiming that they are different, that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act may not apply, it may be unconstitutional. But my news for the people of Georgia, like for Louisiana, is in the end, I'm pretty sure there'll be a new map for 2024, and that will be a +1 for Black voters in Atlanta and a +1 for Democrats.
Okay, moving down from Georgia to Florida.
Florida, okay, we get to at least say a different statute. So Florida is a very interesting state in that it enacted through popular referendum or initiative 10 years ago what are called fair district amendments. And these amendments were put in place to prohibit the state of Florida, when it redistricted, from partisan gerrymandering, but also from diminishing the voting power of minority voters. So in plain English, what it meant is that Florida, when it redistricts, can't reduce the number of Black opportunity districts in this case. And what did Florida do? Well, Florida went about redistricting. They actually, I rarely say a nice thing about a Republican legislature. They originally tried to abide by these fair districts and keep the same number of Black opportunity districts. Ron DeSantis vetoed that map and instructed them to violate the state constitution. So they did that by taking away the 5th congressional district, which was held by Congressman Lawson, turning that into a red conservative district. my law firm again sued. We won before the trial court. The trial judge was a Rick Scott appointee, said that this violated the Fair District. There needs to be a new map. That is now on appeal to the higher courts in Florida. That would be, if we were successful, an additional Democratic seat from where we were in 2022.
Okay. Now, a little bit more obscure here, but Arkansas.
Arkansas is not obscure.
Well,
We love
obscure relative
Arkansas.
to the other states that we've spoken about thus far.
All right.
Not a shot at Arkansas here.
All right, great. So there are 2 lawsuits currently pending in Arkansas. The first is under the U.S. Constitution, the state constitution, and also Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which we've heard a lot. That case is on direct appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. The plaintiffs lost below, but they have brought it directly to the Supreme Court. So we'll see what happens there. But the other lawsuit, which is, in my view, they're both good lawsuits. I don't want anyone hating on me about this. The second one, really a lawsuit to watch, not a case I'm involved in, is under the 14th and 15th Amendments. And that is currently pending in federal courts. All of these cases you can find on Democracy Docket if you go on democracydocket.com and click on the cases page.
Okay, and also we will put the link to Democracy Docket right here on the screen, so you can follow that link on the screen to sign up. And again, it's a free news outlet Marc founded to focus on everything voting in elections. So what are we looking at in terms of additional districts, additional pickup opportunities for Democrats in Arkansas then?
That would be +1. I'm sorry, okay. That would create essentially a Little Rock, a black opportunity district around Little Rock.
Okay, moving over to Kentucky. What's Kentucky look like?
Kentucky is a state constitution partisan gerrymandering claim. Okay, so the claim here is that the state of Kentucky, which has a Republican legislature, passed a map that was egregiously gerrymandered in favor of Republicans. And as you know, there have been successes in some places in bringing these kinds of claims in state court under state constitutions. That is what is going on in Kentucky. The plaintiffs there lost in the lower courts, but the trial court acknowledged that the map was a partisan gerrymander. It just, they thought, wasn't a partisan gerrymander enough. So that case is before the state Supreme Court. State Supreme Court in Kentucky is not a terrible state Supreme Court. And so it's positioned pretty well. If you're the plaintiffs there, you've got a case teed up, not terrible findings for the trial court. That would be +1 for Democrats if that came through.
Okay. Moving over to New Mexico.
Yeah. So New Mexico is a claim brought by Republicans. The Republicans filed a partisan gerrymandering claim under the state constitution there, and they lost. So they lost for the trial court. They are now appealing to the state Supreme Court. I think it is unlikely that the state Supreme Court there will disturb the finding of the trial court because there had been some preliminary rulings by the state Supreme Court about what the standard was. And so I think that will stay the same as where we are. So it'll be a net 0. If that case were reversed, then Republicans would gain 1 seat.
Okay. How about Ohio?
Oh, you really know how to kill a guy. You know, Ohio has broken my heart. You know, my team sued Ohio over and over and over and kept winning and winning and winning. And the Republicans in Ohio were just shameless. They refused to comply with the court's order and they ran out the clock. And so the map was originally struck down by the state Supreme Court. So was the state legislative maps. It was appealed to the Supreme Court. The Republicans appealed it to the Supreme Court. But you know, my team and others, we dismissed our case because in the meantime, the Ohio Supreme Court got so conservative that there was no point in proceeding with it forward. So that map is going to stay exactly the same as it was in 2022.
Okay, so that's net 0 on that one. For some better news here, let's go over to South Carolina.
Thank you. Good. Yeah, South Carolina. South Carolina, great case brought by the NAACP. I had nothing to do with this, but I've been cheering them on. They brought a very, very good case involving the 14th and 15th Amendment and a racial gerrymandering claim. Their claim is that Nancy Mace's district. Nancy Mace, those of you who have been following the news recently, she's been in the news. She pretended to be a moderate for a while, and then she voted to remove the speaker. So I think she's like now auditioning, I don't know, maybe to be like Donald Trump's running mate or something.
Right.
But the reason, part of why she moved ideologically so much, I think, is that Republicans gerrymandered her district to move tens of thousands of black voters out of the district. And the lawsuit that was brought said that these voters were moved precisely because they were black voters, which violates the Constitution. 3-judge panel struck down the map. That case got appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. That was just argued in the U.S. Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago, and we are awaiting a ruling. But if that lower court ruling is upheld, that would be +1 for Democrats, and we will get a ruling before the end of the year. So it will be for 2024.
Okay, a little bit, and so we're looking at net 1 for Democrats, plus one for
+1 for Democrats.
Okay, something that I don't know we'll see this year, Texas. Can you speak on that?
Texas. So Texas is another case that my team filed basically at the last cycle, hoping that we get relief, if not for last cycle, this cycle. But Texas is moving very, very slowly. Now, it is 7 consolidated lawsuits. That's one of the reasons why it's moving slowly, is because you've got 7 different sets of plaintiffs, ranging from the plaintiffs we represent to the Department of Justice has brought some claims. Like, it's a very large case. And some of the claims are under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act for diluting Black and Latino voters, very similar to the claims in Alabama and Louisiana. Others are 14th Amendment claims, very similar to what we just talked about in South Carolina. So it's a lot of different claims. And the Republicans are just like not, they are stalling and making this case go slowly. They're arguing legislative privilege. There was an article in ProPublica about their arguments about legislative privilege that people should check out. So the trial there hasn't yet been scheduled. If and when that case finally gets resolved, we are talking about +3 to 4 districts for Democrats.
Okay, moving over to Utah.
Utah, yeah. Very interesting case in Utah. People write off Utah. Utah's got also kind of what I said about Kentucky. Actually, the state Supreme Court in Utah is a pretty reasonable court. It's not the court I would choose, but it's a pretty reasonable court. And this is a partisan gerrymandering claim. The claim is that the Utah Constitution, and they've got some text in the Constitution here to hang their hat on, but their argument is that the Utah Constitution prohibited gerrymandering the way in which the map was drawn. There had historically been a Salt Lake City district that had been held by a Democrat, or at least had been competitive. And the argument was that was drawn out in a way that violates the Utah Constitution. That was argued in July, and so we are simply waiting on a decision from the Utah Supreme Court, and we'll get that decision in time for 2024. And if that decision goes right, then you would look at +1 in a presidential year with Donald Trump on the ballot. You'd be looking at +1 for Democrats, because it would be a Utah. It would have to be a Salt Lake Center district.
Okay, North Carolina.
So North Carolina has been a journey. It has been a journey. We have gone up a roller coaster, down a roller coaster. We're going all about this. This state started with a Republican legislature that was intent on engaging in egregious partisan gerrymandering. It did that. We sued. My team sued. We struck down the original partisan gerrymander before the trial court, state trial court, state Supreme Court, and that led to a fair map for 2022. So that's the good news. We had a fair map for 2022. You may remember this case winds up going up to the U.S. Supreme Court in Moore v. Harper on this fringe legal theory that you and I have talked about before, called independent state legislature theory, which would abolish the role of courts in reviewing these kinds of maps. But in any event, while that was going on, the composition of the state Supreme Court in North Carolina flipped. It went from being a majority Democratic court to a majority Republican court. So just earlier, the Republican legislature announced the map that they are going to vote on for 2024. And presumably they have the votes, so this will be enacted. The draft that they introduce is absolutely ridiculous. It is an affront to democracy. It would create 4 new Republican districts, or as many as 4 new Republican districts. But I want to say this to you, I said on an earlier episode we did, or a conversation we had, that if there's one comma out of place in that map, they will get sued. So I haven't had a chance to pore over this map, but people hearing this and reading about this map and how terrible it is, I promise you, we're looking at it. Others are looking at it. I can't promise you it will be successful, but we're definitely going to look at it. But as it stands, it would be a plus for Republican map.
Okay. Well, let's end on a high note, and that is New York.
Yeah, so fair maps are coming to New York. New York had also a very interesting journey. New York has an independent redistricting commission. The independent redistricting commission is bipartisan, equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans. After the map was proposed and the legislature altered and adopted a map in 2021, Republican lawyers brought a lawsuit against that map in literally like the most, or one of the most Republican conservative parts of New York State, Steuben County. It's 9 hours by bus from New York City. It is not any place near the large population centers of New York State. That judge drew a map for 2022 that is simply not reflective of the state of New York. It's not reflective of the state of New York on a partisan breakdown. It's not reflective of the state of New York in kind of the way you think about communities of interest. And so my team brought a lawsuit earlier this year to force the Independent Redistricting Commission, this bipartisan group, to now enact a new map for 2024. Our position was that they were under an obligation to do so. They have failed to do so. They should be ordered to do so. Republicans are fighting this tooth and nail. The good news, we had a victory in the intermediate court, and the case is now before the high court in New York. And if the high court in New York agrees with us, there will be a new fair map in place for 2024 in the state of New York, and that would yield between 4 and 6 congressional districts for Democrats. Again, I just want everyone to be clear. That is plus 4 to 6 on a fair map. I'm not talking about a map that I would draw, or perhaps, Brian, you would draw. I'm saying this is the map that a fair bipartisan commission would be expected to draw. So hopefully that relief will come to the people of New York, and they will gain 4, and Democrats will see a gain of 4 to 6 seats.
Okay, well, finally, with all of that having been said, what does it say about this Republican House majority, one, by the way, that is steeped in so much dysfunction that they can't even choose a speaker? What does it say about this Republican House majority that we're looking at between 11 and 14 seats for the Democrats in 2024, which far exceeds the GOP's 5-seat majority that they have right now?
Yeah, it's a tragedy for democracy. It's a tragedy for free and fair elections. It's a tragedy for America. People expect that when they go to the polls, their vote's going to matter, that they choose elected officials, not the other way around. And right now you have a Republican conference that is running the House, although hard to say how much they're actually running anything, but they are in the majority, and it's in many respects, illegitimate. That if you had fair maps, even just the fair maps that were comprised of the districts that were challenged last in 2021, where courts were, because Republicans fought so hard for delay in states like Louisiana and Georgia and Alabama, we would have a Democratic majority. And how different a country this would be. How different, President Biden would be able to govern with a majority in the House and Senate. And so it's a tragedy, Brian. There's no other way to put it, but it's one that we learn from, and we fight, and it causes us to fight harder in the future.
Yeah, well, clearly the impact that these court challenges that you just described are going to have on the next Congress can't be overstated. And just saying thank you to you and your team isn't enough. So for anybody watching to actually support Marc and his team, please sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the free news outlet he founded to focus on everything voting in elections. The link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.